I would like to welcome this morning our first speaker to the platform. He is a native of the state of Indiana. He completed his undergraduate degree in political science and a master's in history at Indiana State University. He's currently a PhD candidate in public administration and policy at Virginia Tech. Greg will, before accepting his current post at Bastyr University in Kenmore, Washington, and I would like to acknowledge Bastyr as a co-sponsor of this event as well. He worked as executive assistant to the president at Indiana State University, addressing external affairs. In addition, he was a senior legislative aide in Washington, D.C., handling education, transportation, and appropriations legislation for two different members of Congress. Currently, as chief of staff at Bastyr University, he provides leadership and oversight to the President's office, to the President and the university at large regarding university-wide strategic planning and annual reporting. He serves as the university's liaison to local, state, and federal government activities. He's a board member of the Health Policy and Leadership, he's a board member of the National Integrative Healthcare Policy Consortium, and in 2011, he founded the Center for Health Policy and Leadership at Bastyr University to encourage active participation in public affairs. Greg is going to be reporting on the feedback from the Stakeholders Conference of 2010 that was presented in cooperation with IHPC, Palmer, and was held at Georgetown University in 2010. Greg, welcome to the platform.
Well, good morning. We've got some hardy souls out here, huh? Jerry, I don't want you to beat yourself up. This reminds me so much once when I was on the campaign trail for Congressman Ed Pease. We were in Bean Blossom, Indiana. It was on a Saturday morning, and I think that there were fewer people at that event than there was here. But we did a little bit better than Rick Santorum. You know, when Santorum, in the early days of his presidential campaign, he was in New Hampshire. And he had an army of staff people with him. You know, they're ready to change the world. They're ready to get out there and get the job done. And he was in a assembly hall of about this size, and there was one person there. And that person looked like that she was about ready to fall asleep. So sometimes the lonely days of a candidate. I really want to thank Jerry for all of the hard work, you and your team, in putting this on. I have just been enormously impressed with Life University, the Octagon, and what you folks are doing. And as a matter of fact, and I'm going to get to this here shortly, it was at a previous Octagon conference, Vitalism and Public Policy, that actually inspired the Stakeholders Conference that I'm here to report on today. And as I've been walking around had the opportunity to maybe walk around the campus a little bit, I was actually reminded, as I am often when I'm on a number of different university campuses, of a speech that President Kennedy delivered in 1963 when he was delivering the commencement address at the American University. It was just a few months before he was killed, but he quoted John Masefield, who said, "There are few earthly things more beautiful than a university." And as I look around at Life University and just this magnificent campus and the physical beauty that is here, that is certainly a beautiful earthly thing. But I believe that Masefield was talking about something more than just the physical beauty. And I think we've experienced it here today, yesterday and the day before at this conference, and that is the energy and the collection of intellect and creativity and passion and drive to make some changes for the better of our world, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm actually representing a couple of organizations. The first is my employer, Bastyr University, a university of the natural health arts and sciences, and and my president, Dr. Daniel K. Church, who very much wanted to be here, but like any university president, he usually has to be at 5 different places at any given time. So Dr. Klum was very kind enough to allow me to come in Dr. Church's place. I serve as his chief of staff, and one of the strategic initiatives of Bastyr University is that we will convene and we will participate in essential generative conversations that inform the cultivation of practitioners and influence policy decisions that contribute to restoring the world's intrinsic health. No small potatoes there. And in order to do that, you've got to work your way to be invited to the table. And I loved that quote that, John, you had talked about, being at the table, otherwise you're going to be on the menu. I think that is so aptly put. But we also need to be convening the conversation, not just asking to be invited or forcing our way to the table. We need to be the ones who convene. And that's why I especially appreciate what's going on here at the Octagon. So I'm also here representing Dr. Lynn Wisniewski, a comrade in arms, if you will, when it comes to integrative healthcare. He's the chairman of the board of the IHPC, which is a broad coalition of healthcare professionals and patients and organizations that are driving public policy and to make a better world so that all Americans may have access to safe, high-quality, affordable health care. The IHPC was actually initiated at the request of legislators who support integrative health care and felt like they needed an organization to represent the consensus voice of the various communities. And through a lot of hard work, IHPC has become that trusted voice on Capitol Hill. As Jerry mentioned, I had spent a couple of, about close to 6 years working for a couple of members of Congress. And by my 6th year, I was the old man, you know, at age 28. And that's because the average career span on Capitol Hill is usually somewhere between 6 months and maybe 3 years, up to 3 years. And it's for a reason. You have a lot of 20-somethings who are all fired up, who are ready to change the world and are willing to work for peanuts and put in a whole lot of hours. And it's a great starting point for a lot of careers, mine included. And so the plus of that is you have a lot of energy and you have a lot of passion, young people who are working in these congressional offices. On the downside, there's a lot of turnover. And so just as you begin to build a relationship with a particular group of individuals in a congressman or a senator's staff, you call them up one day and you find out, hell, I'm leaving here in 30 days, and so you have to start all over. And, you know, John was talking about yesterday about, you know, as a lobbyist kind of being kicked around a little bit. Well, they're the ones who have the institutional knowledge, the memory, and they're the ones that keep a lot of members of Congress informed, up to speed with the issues that are going on, and certainly our former executive director, Janet Kahn, and a group of very dedicated volunteers have been that trusted voice. And so I put up here about the mission of IHPC to direct national healthcare agenda toward a health-oriented, integrated system, ensuring all people access to the full range of safe and regulated, conventional, complementary, and alternative healthcare professionals, therapies, and products, and to the building blocks of health, including clean air and water, as well as a healthy food supply. So we recognize that there are environmental aspects of what we do. Food safety and an individual's access to healthy nutrition is very much part of it too. And as our namesake at Bastyr University, Dr. John Bastyr, would often say, food is the best medicine. And so the IHPC, in a way, is more than just about healthcare, but health and wellness combined in total. So the IHPC, you know, what we believe and what we know, we believe that integrated health care has a critical role to play in addressing the issues of the current health care crisis, cost and quality. And what we know is that we need to reprioritize. And that's what we've been talking about throughout the course of this conference. And certainly the IHPC believes in that and is working to change that. And we've got just a fascinating and collection of individuals and organizations who come together, may not always agree on everything, but certainly finds a consensus that then allows for a unified voice to be delivered to various places, whether it is at a state house or at the federal level. So when I was asked to make this presentation on the stakeholders report, I recall taking a very deep breath, because I recall spending about 2.5 days at Georgetown with my colleagues, and there was a lot discussed. And the report itself, I don't know if anyone has had the opportunity of reading the report yet, and I'm going to tell you shortly how you can access it if you have not. The report itself is about 40 pages, and even the report, it does a very, very good job. It's hard to capture all of the conversations that were taking place, formally and informally. And I have a little less than an hour to talk about 2.5 days worth of work. And frankly, there are 6 different topics on which I'm going to speak this morning, and you could spend an entire day on any one of these topics. So I'm going to have to move fairly quickly, and I hope that you will find that, that this presentation is not only informative, but I hope there's some inspiration. Because what I would love to be able to report back to my fellow board members is that we were able to convince some of those who are here and some of those who may be watching at a future date to get involved with some of the work that we are doing, and to roll up your sleeves and get your 2 cents in, because we need to hear from you what you're experiencing, and your recommendations to be a part of that unified voice based on consensus. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the Affordable Care Act, and we know that on March 30th in 2010, history was made as President Obama signed into law the Affordable Care Act. I'm going to call it the ACA moving forward here. It gives health care coverage to over 32 million people who might not otherwise have it. It prohibits some of the most egregious insurance practices, such as denying coverage to people with pre-existing conditions. It broadens access to health care approaches of an individual's choice. It does make some meaningful steps away from a model of disease-oriented delivery toward a more prevention and health promotion system of health care. It ain't perfect. We recognize that, and I was feeling the pain of people who were very frustrated over some of the aspects of this law. And like any piece of legislation, it's not perfect. But as the old saying goes, legislation, like sausage, there's a lot that goes into it, and it's never a whole lot of fun watching either of those processes and what goes into both. But that's the system in which we live. And so our desire is to try to improve it through the implementation, and to make certain that we can get in there, be aggressive, and do some good things that are going to keep Americans healthy and productive. So the law includes provisions that had been on the agenda of many complementary and alternative healthcare professional associations and certainly educational institutions like Bastyr University for years. And to celebrate the accomplishments of the ACA, and there are some accomplishments, and to also organize for the rulemaking process, 3 organizations came together. The IHPC, the Institute for Integrative Health, and Palmer College of Chiropractic co-hosted a conference in late September of 2010. It was called the Affordable Care Act and Beyond, and it was held in Georgetown, and it was both an opportunity for educational sessions and then also some roll-up-the-sleeves strategizing. And as Jerry said, a report was developed that summarizes what we accomplished during those 2.5 days, as well as some various actions following the conference. And it is currently available at the ihpc.org's website. And I've got to really commend Janet Kahn and Dr. Michael Traub, who put a lot of time and effort into it and helped produce, I think, a very informative and meaningful report. So there were 6 working groups that met during these couple of half days and pursued, I guess, 6 different initiatives, including access and non-discrimination, the healthcare workforce, prevention and wellness, CPT codes, comparative effectiveness research, and the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, and then a group on integration in practice, lessons for implementation under the ACA. Each group had a charge, and as you'll see here, to discuss and strategize around a cluster of access-related issues, including rulemaking plans for Section 2706 of the ACA, other aspects of discrimination, including grants to educational institutions, loan reimbursement opportunities, residency funding, breaking down the disparity across patient demographics in terms of access in integrated healthcare. So we've spent quite a bit of time talking about discrimination, and Section 2706 of the ACA specifically states that, quote, a group health plan and a health insurance issuer offering group or individual health insurance coverage shall not discriminate with respect to participation under the plan or coverage against any healthcare provider who is acting within the scope of that provider's license or certification under applicable state law. So how does this take place? How does discrimination take place? We probably all can come up with our own stories of what perhaps we may have personally experienced or we've seen colleagues experience, but discrimination against CAM providers has certainly been allowed by private insurers, and this has rendered CAM use a privilege for those who can afford it or those who can pay for it out of pocket. In addition, the Congressional Research Service, one of the best tools ever invented, particularly for a dumb 20-something-year-old congressional staffer who needs to become an expert pretty quickly. They rely on the Congressional Research Service, a nonpartisan collection of PhDs and lawyers who are just spectacular researchers and really can get to the heart of some of these policy issues. The CRS has documented extensive discrimination in all federal health care programs, citing the Veterans Administration as the least discriminatory. Discrimination can take place in the form of refusal to include whole categories of health care professionals for reimbursement for insurance. Naturopathic physicians, for instance, are not included in many programs, even when they are performing services for which they're trained and licensed, and which other professionals, such as allopathic and osteopathic physicians or nurse practitioners, are being compensated. you want to get an ND all fired up, you talk about that issue and you brace yourself for about the next hour because it's something that is certainly near and dear to their hearts after they go through some unbelievably rigorous training and education and then yet are told by policy makers, decision makers, through the various laws and regulations that they're second-class citizens. It doesn't feel good. In other cases, CAM care professionals have been allowed into a system and yet are not allowed to practice to the full extent of their license or their scope of practice. In addition, regarding discrimination in health professions, in education, you've got CAM educational institutions which typically rely on tuition for the vast majority of their total budgets, while the comparable figure for conventional institutions is significantly less in comparison, with much of the difference due to various forms of government support. So you talk to your typical ND student who will end up leaving an institution like Bastyr University with over $100,000 in student loan debt, and that coupled with the fact that, hey, well, we recognize that you've gone through the rigors of a medical school, and yet you're not going to be able to practice to the full extent of your license. That's kind of that's a tough one to take in, and it makes a lot of people not too happy. And in the meantime, you've got a lot of people who are in need of those services who aren't going to even get access. Federal loan repayment programs, such as service in the United States Public Health Service Corps, are not currently available to CAM practitioners. And similarly, CAM educational institutions have historically been shut out of federal grants for training programs, laboratory capacity building, and the like. So against this backdrop, the IHPC and CAM professional associations have, for years, sought federal protection against such discrimination, asking for a more level playing field. And while the ACA appears to be making an important step in this direction, some key terms in the language we're arguing are ambiguous, and the language of the law leaves some critical questions unresolved. For instance, the term "shall not discriminate" needs to be defined, as does a health insurance issuer, so that it becomes hopefully crystal clear whether Medicaid and Medicare, for example, are included. So what came out of that part of the conference? Deborah Sen spoke very eloquently on non-discrimination and what needs to happen. And I know this is very wordy. I had to work hard to get everything into one slide, and I'm not going to read them all. I'll leave it up there for a minute, but I'll touch on a couple of the key points. They're all important, but what particularly came out of our conversation, and I remember I was part of that particular working group, was that this section, I believe it was said yesterday, Senator Harkin was responsible for Section 2706. And Deborah had mentioned that her colleague, the former Maryland Commissioner of Insurance, Steve Larson, is the one who is actually overseeing the implementation of this. That the regulatory language clarifying the new non-discrimination policy should specifically list examples of insurance company actions that are prohibited under 2706, as well as those permitted. What better way to spell it out than to provide specific actions so that it's crystal clear and make it difficult for the lawyers to dissect and make it harder for us to be able to do what we do. We also note that because entrenched funding patterns generally preserve a status quo that favors conventional and denies benefits to CAM professionals and therapies, regulatory language is needed to ensure that a policy of non-discrimination is also applied to the grants to educational institutions, loan repayment programs, and residency funding. We determined that the IHPC and its Partners for Health needed to establish a task force to work on specific language for rulemaking and to determine what other strategy actions and steps should be taken. That the language should be formally submitted to HHS. The task force should also work at the state level with insurance commissioners. And so where we've left it is that, that the working group that met about a year and a half ago on non-discrimination is going to engage in another round of meetings via conference call, and then I'm hoping that, that Bastyr University might even be able to sponsor a sort of a working group mini conference, if you will, on our campus. And the good news is, bad news, I'll start with the challenging news. The challenging news is obviously we got a lot of tough work ahead, but it's doable, and we've got a very convincing and compelling champion who has the chops in Deborah Sin to be able to convey what needs to be conveyed to the right people, like Mr. Larson. So to date, while 2706 is focusing on non-discrimination, it's not planned to go into effect, as Deborah had said yesterday, until 2014. There has been much opportunity to address issues of patient access and discrimination, and efforts to have the services of CAM and integrated healthcare professions included in the essential benefits package have taken place. I had the opportunity last November in Seattle. There was an essential benefits listening tour by the regional HHS director, and the chiropractors were very well represented at that event. It was one of those things where I had prepared to spend about 10 minutes, probably longer, talking about what essential benefits meant for naturopathic doctors. I was given 90 seconds. And because the room was so full, and there is a lot of interest when it comes to essential benefits, and so certainly being a part of that conversation is going to be critical, and the IHPC is trying to collect, trying to shepherd everybody together who are folks who are at this conference and those who couldn't be here, to make certain that we've got a unified voice. Number two was the integration in practice, lessons for implementation of the ACA. And here, this is where we had a lot of the practitioners who were coming together to share their own experiences with integrated service delivery and the awareness of the other important sites of integration, identifying some key lessons learned from their experience, to explore the application of those lessons with regard to the ACA, to develop strategies and sharing lessons with those who are responsible for implementation of the relevant sections of that part of the law. And so just some background that kind of helps shape how those recommendations were made. When you talk about high-quality integrative care, it's blending the best, IHPC believes, the best of conventional medicine with the best of complementary and alternative medicine. It's about engaging patients in decision-making, empowering them and helping hold them accountable to take ownership of their own actions. The ACA mentions integrative care several times and recognizes its potential value in the development of patient-centered medical homes. I don't want to offend anyone. Medical homes, we got to deal with it, which occupies an increasing role of importance in the organization of coordinated outpatient care, and Linda Shelton spent a great deal of time talking about that yesterday. So Section 3502 of the ACA establishes grants for medical homes, requires that these be supported by community health teams as a means towards enhanced coordination and integration. Recognizing a contemporary healthcare force includes both conventional and CAM practitioners. The law states that community-based interdisciplinary and interprofessional teams are to support the patient-centered medical home, and that they may include licensed CAM practitioners and doctors of chiropractic. So we all know the CAM practitioners currently play significant roles in forward-looking clinics that embrace the medical home concept. Over the last decade, the Veterans Administration has also moved to integrate chiropractic and acupuncture into a mix of health services provided to our nation's veterans. Meditation, massage, yoga, and other mind-body practices have been integrated into various programs for veterans who are returning home from physical and emotional challenges from places like Iraq and Afghanistan. So the question is, how do we accomplish what the law does, and how do we do it well? And so this particular group's recommendations include regulation language needed to ensure meaningful inclusion of a broad range of practitioners in medical homes. Since what we're being told is, okay, the medical home is what we have to work with, well then let's be aggressive and let's work to ensure that we've got the broadest range of practitioners possible as part of those medical teams. To include CAM providers, licensed CAM providers, and integrative healthcare practitioners. This could involve vigorous HHS incentives to form integrative medical homes and to incorporate a range of CAM practitioners into all medical homes. Regulatory language is needed to define the integrative healthcare practitioner in clearly inclusive terms so that, and I love this language, so that no reasonable person would interpret as giving permission to exclude or marginalize CAM practitioners. And I remember when I heard that, I said, reasonable in Washington, D.C.? That doesn't quite make sense. It had to have been an attorney, because we had JDs and DCs and NDs and MDs and LACs. We had this collection of people in this give and take at this conference. So I'm thinking that it was a JD who was responsible for plugging that language in there. Individuals in a navigator role, and I love that language, in a navigator role must be thoroughly familiar with the full range of options available. We want people to take responsibility of his or her health care. Well, then they need to be informed. And in this day in technology, there is absolutely no excuse as to why someone should not be able to be informed of the various options so that he or she can take care of one's own health. And so a patient-centered home is where the patient retains choice of provider and is informed of all the available options. And that was something that I recall was very near and dear to the hearts of those people in this particular working group. So as a next step, a task force is being activated to provide guidance on proposed regulatory language to include inclusion of CAM providers in medical homes and community health teams. And for those who are here and those who may be watching in the future online, I'm speaking to you. This is your opportunity to get involved. And I'm particularly mindful of the young man who was here yesterday, really voicing some frustration during Linda's presentation. And I happened to run into him in the men's room after that. And I said, hey, are you going to come? We're going to be here tomorrow. And he said he thought he was going to be here. I don't know if he's here or not. But I said, you need to get involved with the IHPC. This is right up your alley. This is the kind of thing where you need to express what you're feeling, let people know what you're seeing, and get involved in that conversation, because now is the opportunity as we are rolling out this law, regardless of what's going to happen with the Supreme Court. There are things that are taking place with the implementation of this law that that's going to impact how he and how his colleagues are going to be able to practice and better the lives of people who walk through their doors. And so I would just highly compel individuals who are practitioners to get involved in this particular working group. The next working group was working on comparative effectiveness research and patient-centered outcomes research institute, setting the research agenda. And specifically, the charge, as you'll see here, is to advise the assembled body on the suggested relationship to the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute and other bodies with related responsibilities, and to address the research agenda itself, get involved and talk about what specifically needs to be on our nation's research agenda, including the most important areas of study, methodological issues in comparative effectiveness research, the definition of effectiveness, commentary on the Institute of Medicine's comparative effectiveness research. So the background behind this working group. Comparative effectiveness research is critical to the development of effective integrative healthcare. Patients, providers, policymakers, and insurers need the kind of evidence that allows them to make decisions regarding care. I can't speak from the practitioner point of view. I can speak to, I guess, a patient point of view, and I can certainly speak to working in an incredibly busy and stressful congressional office, and 9 times out of 10 when somebody comes to us asking to make XYZ changes to any given law or to enact another law or to support or sponsor a bill that will become a law, we want to see some evidence that talks about the need and the demand. And so this requires evidence that allows comparisons across potential treatment options and examining the outcomes. In this arena, distinctions between methods considered conventional, complementary, alternative, or integrative should disappear. What we argue is that the only distinction that matters is whether a particular approach is effective or ineffective in achieving desired health outcomes and avoiding adverse side effects. Avoiding, what's in the small print on all of those television commercials, the side effects. We think that's absolutely important. So established under Section 6301 of the ACA, PCORI will be the federal government's main body determining the agenda and overseeing the funding of the patient-centered outcomes research. The ACA included a dedicated funding stream for the Institute generated through Medicare. So you'll see here the recommendations of the various things that PCORI should do. It should fund a series of well-designed, head-to-head pragmatic trials in which conventional methods are compared to integrative or complementary methods, taking into account patient and practitioner-driven priorities. Should prioritize the funding for studies that include integrative or complementary care, an arm of the project. Taking a look at what we already know where CAM care can be a tremendous help in deterring chronic pain, cardiovascular disease, arthritis, as well as adjunctive therapy where integrative approaches are added in conventional care like cancer. That is something that has been the growing research agenda at Bastyr University has to do with what naturopathic medicine solutions can do to help augment the cancer treatment that people are receiving in Seattle, Washington. PCORI should have integrative healthcare representation on every committee, including peer review study sections for proposals submitted. And so, with regard to PCORI, Dr. Christine Gertz DC, and a PhD. One of the organizers of our stakeholders conference in Georgetown was appointed to the Board of Governors, and we were just thrilled about that. And so far, the word is that it's done a pretty good job to date at keeping the public informed of their activities and soliciting feedback. Number 4, we're almost through it. Number 4, the healthcare workforce. This is another one that I'm hoping that we might be able to inspire some interest among the people here. You'll see the charge to discuss the new healthcare workforce, including various definitions of categories never seen before, such as integrative healthcare practitioner, which need to be defined for rulemaking. Again, we're talking about the implementation of the law through rulemaking. The implications of the new definition for educational institutions, and how our community should relate to the National Healthcare Workforce Commission. So a little bit of background behind that conversation. The ACA sets the stage for ongoing reconsideration of the U.S. healthcare workforce and its appropriateness for meeting the country's healthcare needs. 2 important elements are contained in Section 5101 of the law: the creation of a National Healthcare Workforce Commission and an expansion of who is included in this law's definition of healthcare workforce. I don't have to argue in this group on the importance of an appropriate healthcare workforce. It's not a simple task. It was just mind-boggling. I'm always mindful of the fact that we've got the baby boomer generation that's entering into retirement mode. But the implications are going to be long-term and enormous, both on the number of patients who are going to be required access to the healthcare workforce, as well as the shortages, as many of those individuals who had made up the healthcare workforce are retiring. And so this huge demand of workers, demand for workers by an increasing number of patients. And so ensuring that the nation has an appropriate healthcare workforce is not necessarily a simple task. Laws have been enacted with the usual mix of the public good, special interests, sort of public policy 101. And what is the public good, and how does that usually influenced by often a group of extremely well-funded, well-organized group of special interests. Professional priorities and assumptions have been expressed through the curricula of each profession's educational institutions. And you want to get John Weeks all wound up, you start talking about that and whether or not we're talking to one another as we're developing this curricula to ensure that we are adding to the army of a qualified healthcare workforce. So in this context, the work of the National Healthcare Workforce Commission includes evaluating how well the current educational institutions can provide for the needed workforce, identifying the barriers to optimal coordination between diverse levels of government, including federal, state, and local, recommending solutions to those barriers, encouraging innovations needed to address the changing needs of the population. As that baby boomer generation is retiring and their needs are increasing, how are those needs changing as that population ages? The changing opportunities of developing knowledge and technology. The ACA defined the American healthcare workforce as specifically including integrative health practitioners, and as it is undefined by the law, unfortunately it remains subject to interpretation. And so we need to be motivated to make certain that the interpretation is inclusive and provides opportunities for the students of our various educational institutions the opportunity to go on and to help meet the need. A key impediment to the mainstreaming of integrative care is that most health professionals and the institutions in which they work largely function within their own individual silos. Dr. Klum had talked about, I'm at the dissertation phase of a PhD program in public policy and administration. And my research question, Dr. Klum, is going to relate to how organizations react when dealing with all of these silos. And John Weeks works very, very hard through ACAC to try to chisel away at these various silos and to ensure that we got people who are talking to one another. And it is not just a challenge within CAM, it's just not just a challenge within healthcare, it's a challenge within nearly every single educational institution in the United States of America when you've got faculty, and then within the faculty they have their own following of students, stay within their own little corner of a particular facility and are doing amazing work that can be followed by any corner of the globe, and yet just down the hall, maybe 50 feet away, another group of faculty and another following of students don't have a clue what they're doing. And we have got to be all involved and working together and remain committed to breaking down these silos if we're going to be effective in conveying through this rulemaking process ways to be inclusive for all practitioners. And then frankly, if we're going to do what's in the best interest of patients who are in need of these services. And so the recommendations that came out of this group: regulatory language is needed to define the new provider designation, integrative healthcare practitioner, and to ensure that it's included in the ACA. Appointments to the National Health Workforce Commission should include members of integrative and CAM professions. Educational institutions should be incentivized to develop or expand both didactic and clinical programs in integrative healthcare, including cross-disciplinary training, including both CAM and conventional providers. I hope someday that, John Weeks, you're going to be able to get one big grant, federal grant, to help do that, because you're already doing that now with your work, and with not as much funding as you deserve. But if we're going to crack that, it's going to take some funding, and it's going to take the decision makers to actually incentivize that. Number 5, prevention and wellness, reorienting American health care. And so that charge for that group number 5 was to explore the aspects of the law that address prevention, health promotion, and wellness, including how these new entities and declarations relate to existing efforts, opportunities in rulemaking once again to strengthen this new focus, and our community's historic, present, and future place in prevention and wellness efforts. And I particularly love this one because this is what it's all about. Making sure that people are living healthy lives, that are committed to their own health choices and decisions, and are motivated and constantly seeking self-improvement and maintaining health. And so, in our belief, among the potentially far-reaching aspects of the ACA is the emphasis on prevention and wellness, and there have been previous presentations on that as well. I don't have to tell this group, but I will. I'll remind us that our current healthcare system is predominantly focused on the response and treatment of disease, as opposed to disease prevention and health promotion. Present-day prevention efforts in the United States often concentrate more heavily on secondary prevention, such as early disease detection. How about avoiding disease altogether, instead of just focusing on, well, let's try to detect it early on. Primary prevention efforts, on the other hand, focus on behavioral elements that create and maintain optimal health and wellness: healthy eating, regular exercise, injury prevention, stress management, balance. And the aim is to prevent injury and illness in the first place. How profound. It's well understood that in order for detection to be effective, it must be followed by behavior change, and that's what this is all about. Section 4001 of the ACA called for the establishment of the National Prevention, Health Promotion, and Public Health Council, chaired by the U.S. Surgeon General. And then it also called for the designation of an advisory group on prevention, health promotion, and integrative and public health, which will report to the council and the Surgeon General. And this advisory council is sort of the link to the various grassroots organizations, the people who come to conferences like this, so that what they're hearing, what they're picking up when they're hearing and seeing these different presentations at good conferences such as this one, that then they'll be able to report back to the council that is chaired by the U.S. Surgeon General. So it's a great concept, and it is tasked to provide coordination and leadership at the interagency federal level and among all executive departments and agencies on prevention, wellness, and health promotion. So this is the group that's going to sort of be the herder of the cats at the federal level and try to get everybody in the same room and speaking off of the same page, using the information provided to them by this advisory council. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. That might be a little disheartening as to what the status is of that right now. So the recommendations, though, of this particular group involve proposed actions by the IHPC rather than the federal government. And that was just because as the commission and as the council are still in formulation, and as at the time that they were still even working to identify, okay, who's going to be serving, it seemed premature to just begin dictating what the beliefs were of what the federal government ought to be doing, but instead, what should we, the members of the IHPC, ought to be doing in preparation for that. And so the IHPC, in moving forward, identifying an inventory of existing efforts across the federal government that promote health and wellness and prevention, identifying the federal bodies in the fields. So as the Surgeon General and this commission is going to be working with interagency and all the various executive departments and agencies, we better make certain we know what all of them are and who our various points of contacts are within those various agencies and departments. List them and make certain that it's clearly accessible. Determining the areas of opportunity and matching community members with the goals shared by the various member groups and the broader integrative health community. Updating community members about key issues, serving as like a clearinghouse of information. And again, I'm going to get back to this one here at my conclusion. Finally, number 6, certainly the most technical. I was on the phone with Dr. Bruce Milliman and Dr. Pamela Snyder yesterday, who are experts on CPT codes. And so the charge here was to explore the issues to the creation, management, ownership, and usage of CPT codes. They're not addressed in the ACA, but it was felt that the following issues listed up here deserved attention. And so the charge, as you can see here, how CPT codes currently serve or don't serve the various CAM professions, the potential value of alternative approaches to reporting and reimbursement, action strategies to add codes needed. And very briefly, according to Dr. Milliman, here's the background of what drove that particular conversation. Does everybody know what CPT codes are? All right. I'm happy, so I don't have to go through all of that. managed by the American Medical Association. Anybody have a problem with that? All right. I don't have to even go through all of the seemingly conflict of interests that that certainly proposes. And if there's anybody here from the AMA, I guess my apologies if I'm offending you. Bruce had told me about ABC Coding Solutions. It was founded to provide a more comprehensive coding system. Despite the limitations of CPT codes and the concerns about AMA ownership and the income that the AMA gets from the ownership, ABC Codes is the only other system to be developed, and it has not had as much traction with the federal government despite its support by a number of healthcare professions. And got a whole laundry list of recommendations provided that I'm not going to read, but I'll just summarize as this: that there are a number, obviously, of codes in existence that can be utilized. Let's see here. The second from the bottom here, the approach, the CPT editorial panel to invite clarification of a number of issues, including the critical distinction of some wording, has been underway, and progress is being made. And ultimately, what this working group came to the conclusion is that doing a better job of making the connection between Section 2706, which I highlighted at the beginning of the presentation, and the CPT codes, we need to make that connection, and we need to clarify the importance of the connectivity between those two in order to see improvement. Ultimately, though, any qualified healthcare professional needs to have access to the codes. And certainly that there's been a great deal of discussion on that issue, and it is leading to action, and Drs. Milliman and Snyder have been really embracing that charge on behalf of IHPC. So a little summary of progress to date with regard to the various councils, groups, and institutes and commissions. The law appoints people to do all sorts of different types of various forms of implementation. The National Healthcare Workforce Commission, I mentioned a little bit earlier. It's one of the, probably used to be a dirty little secret, but I think a lot of people, certainly if you pay any attention to politics and the formulation of policy in a consensus style of environment like our beloved United States Congress, knows that a fairly effective strategy for derailing anything is to somehow forget to appropriate funds for implementation. Imagine that. And so that's what has taken place when it comes to the Healthcare Workforce Commission. The charge is to evaluate the education and the training activities to determine whether the demand of healthcare workers is being met. And so the commission is to do all of this in the context of a redefinition of the healthcare workforce. And yet, to date, funds haven't been appropriated for the commission. And so while the commissioners have been appointed, the commission hasn't taken any action, and in fact isn't even meeting. And it's something that is of certainly concern, as the rollout of this law is going to be taking place, and we need to make certain that the aspects of the law that needs to be funded is funded. I mentioned earlier the National Prevention, Health Promotion, and Public Health Council, and then that advisory group on prevention, health promotion, and integrative in public health. The two bodies were created to address the strongly enhanced focus on prevention and health promotion. While the law provided for funds to be appropriated in specific amounts annually, into a prevention and public health fund to be administered by the HHS Secretary. Once again, attempts have been made for a negation of those appropriations. And so for that reason, a number of stakeholder groups, such as the IHPC, signed letters initiated by the Trust for America's Health to protect this critical resource. And if you get online and you're able to pull up the report itself, it has just a lovely appendix of letters that actually demonstrate what the IHPC and its partners have been able to do in communicating to some of these decision makers on various things, whether it is asking them to appoint representatives from the CAM communities, funding issues, language definition, those kinds of activities where the IHPC has been instrumental. In the meantime, Dr. Wayne Jonas of the Samueli Institute has presented to the Prevention and Integrative Health Working Group of the advisory group. Also, our former ED, Janet Kahn, IHPC ED, has been appointed as a member of the Prevention and Integrative Health Working Group of that advisory group. So we're heartened and grateful that Janet is there, looking out for the interests. Regarding the healthcare workforce, as I've said earlier, it's still on hold, and we need to encourage members of Congress to encourage, to A, find funding, and then secondly, to encourage for that group to at least be meeting in some way or communicating with one another. So in conclusion, let me say that because of the limited time, and I know I've thrown a lot at you, but frankly, I've only scratched the surface of what needs to be done and what was actually discussed thoroughly throughout that magnificent conference. The ACA is comprehensive, it's complex. Implementation was designed for a 4-year process. That's fairly ambitious in Washington terms. Only some of the provisions most closely related to integrated health care have gone into effect. Others are still in the rulemaking process, and some have up to more than 2 years until it'll be rolled out. We heard from Mr. O'Brien yesterday about what's going on at the Supreme Court. Let's not be distracted by that. I know it's easy to do, but the fact remains that there's a lot of things that we can and should be doing regardless of what's going on there, and it has to do with the rulemaking. I talked earlier about the turnover at the congressional level. In 2010, there was a pretty significant turnover, and you had a number of new legislators and staff on Capitol Hill still learning about the law, some of its lesser known aspects, including those related to integrative health care. I'm not going to get political here, but I will just emphasize from my own opinion that there are indeed champions from both political parties. And as Jerry said, I'm an Indiana guy. There's a guy by the name of Dan Burton who's not necessarily known for nonpartisan behavior. Dan Burton has made 2 trips to Bastyr University to learn more about what we do when his first wife was diagnosed with cancer, and they were extremely dissatisfied by the treatment, and they wanted something more. And I'm absolutely convinced that if we can convince Dan Burton to come to Bastyr University to learn more about what we do and who we are, we can convince anyone. And it's incumbent upon all of us to reach out to our own members of Congress and our own connections, regardless of political philosophy, to encourage more people to embrace these truly common sense solutions that are going to make our citizens healthier, productive, and happier. And so the IHPC and our Partners for Health allies, we have been engaged in a series of congressional briefings. We've done a couple so far. We're going to do a third. The Bastyr University Center for Health Policy and Leadership has been one of the sponsors of that effort, and it really does pay to be present, to invite congressional staff members and the occasional member of Congress who takes some time to come out for a little while to actually show up and learn more about what we do and make those convincing and compelling arguments. The last point, the most important one, it's the one that I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't shameless in saying we need your help. We need you to be involved. Often it is a daunting task and it seems overwhelming as far as, okay, outside of voting, what can I do to be involved? If you want to be involved, stop and see me or Nancy Gales, who's going to be speaking afterwards, or Jerry, and let us know if you would like to be a part of any of the working groups that I just outlined here. And if so, then we'll get you connected to the right people, the right leadership of those working groups, and then you can be a part of that process and join this voice. At that, I thank you very much. Thanks again, Jerry, for the opportunity to speak.